Buenas tardes a todos. Agradezco su presencia y quisiera hacer unos comentarios que están relacionados precisamente con una palabra que a mí me encanta, que se llama agradecer. ¿No les parece hermoso este póster? Este es un diseño que hicieron los diseñadores del Colegio Nacional, Alicia Sandoval y Sofía Grivas, y los chicos que trabajan con ellos. A la hora de hacer uno de estos diseños, ellos platican con uno y de alguna manera mágica, que yo no entiendo cómo todavía, pero que tiene que ver con el cerebro y con las charlas del día de hoy, ellos diseñan estos carteles que verdaderamente son preciosos. Precisamente la mano de un sujeto, la mano artificial, un objeto que tiene un valor utilitario tanto para los seres humanos como para los monos, y por supuesto un objeto artificial. Entonces, de alguna manera, durante esta noche estaremos hablando de estas dos cosas, efectivamente. Lo segundo que yo quisiera decir que este simposio se lleva a cabo gracias a los organizadores del Festival Aleph de Arte y Ciencia que tuvo lugar en Ciudad Universitaria la semana pasada y que culminó el día de ayer. Entonces ellos hicieron un esfuerzo inconmensurable por traer una serie de invitados de muy lejos. Y a mí, afortunadamente, me pidieron que si podía sugerir algunos personajes interesantes del mundo de las neurociencias, y por supuesto que no podía dejar de pensar en dos de las personas que están haciendo un trabajo extraordinario y que lo han hecho y que lo están haciendo y que lo seguirán haciendo, como es el profesor Giacomo Rizzolatti de la Universidad de Parma, y el profesor Richard Andersen del Instituto Tecnológico de California. Dado que ellos van a hablar ampliamente de sus temas y que yo estoy seguro que ustedes los van a poder seguir, yo quisiera recordarles a esta figura que fue mentor tanto de Richard Andersen como mía. Y de alguna manera Giacomo Rizzolatti también la conoció, y también esta figura, este personaje, Pablo Rudomin, y muchos de algunos colegas, mis estudiantes que han pasado por mi laboratorio. Vernos Mount Castle fue un pájaro muy raro. Algunos pensaban que era un tipo hosco, que era difícil, y probablemente sí era difícil, pero era muy rígido, muy duro a la hora de con una moral y una ética para trabajar como no lo he conocido en mucha gente. Pero a mí lo que me interesa mostrarles, antes de que presente a Giacomo Rizzolatti y a Richard Andersen, es lo que escribió en alguna ocasión, que a mí me parece realmente hasta poético, que cada uno de nosotros cree vivir directamente en el mundo que le rodea. Y eso es lo que estamos sintiendo en este momento. Sintiendo precisamente los objetos y eventos, viviendo en un mundo real en el presente. Mount Castle pensaba, yo pienso que son solo ilusiones perceptuales. Cada uno de nosotros confronta el mundo que le rodea por medio de unos cuantos millones de frágiles aferentes que nos conectan con el mundo real, con el cerebro, lo único que nos conecta con el mundo real. Las fibras sensoriales no siempre registran ni transmiten la fidelidad de los objetos. A veces los acentúan o los ignoran. Ya ustedes se pueden imaginar qué le pasa al cerebro. Una sensación, por lo tanto, es simplemente una abstracción y no una réplica del mundo real. El cerebro construye una realidad del mundo externo con base a lo que le dictan las aferentes sensoriales. Estas representaciones, por lo tanto, no son más que nuevas abstracciones del cerebro, construyendo una realidad interna que nos permite interpretar el mundo que nos rodea en función de la experiencia, viviendo inevitablemente en el pasado, presente, nuestra experiencia consciente. Esto es lo que pensaba Vernon Castro hasta los años 70, y muchos de nosotros fuimos atraídos por sus experimentos y por su filosofía de trabajo. Lo que vamos a ver ahora, si usted me pasa la siguiente, por favor. El siguiente archivo, por favor. Es otra cosa. De 1975 a la fecha han pasado cosas verdaderamente extraordinarias. Y no solamente ya estudiamos cómo los estímulos o los eventos que nos rodean son transducidos por nuestros receptores visuales, auditivos, somestésicos. Inclusive hubo un premio Nobel que se lo dieron por haber descubierto los receptores olfativos, gustativos. Esos transducen la energía física y química y se transforman en potenciales de acción, chispitas eléctricas que instruyen al cerebro. Y con eso el cerebro genera nuestras sensaciones, luego las percepciones, aprendemos, generamos experiencias, tomamos decisiones, generamos actos voluntarios. Esto último es precisamente lo que ha sucedido en los últimos años. Y precisamente es lo que hace el cerebro ya con las experiencias. El primer conferencista de esta noche es el profesor Giacomo Rizzolatti, un hombre verdaderamente extraordinario. A mí me emociona porque cuando yo trabajaba en Friburgo, Suiza, en los años 80, ya era una figura verdaderamente muy respetable por todos nosotros. Pero ¿cuál fue mi sorpresa? Que en los años 90, siendo un hombre de aproximadamente unos 50 y tantos años, y luego dicen que no hay espacio para la creatividad, describió una serie de cuestiones fundamentales de nuestro cerebro, no solamente de los animales, sino también de nuestros cerebros, que es precisamente lo que va a hablar. Y como todos nosotros, tiene una historia. Él estudió medicina en Pavía en estos tiempos, luego estudió neurología en el mismo sitio por estas fechas, luego fue profesor asistente en la Universidad de Pisa, con una figura verdaderamente extraordinaria, porque ahora me pongo a reflexionar, y las neurociencias mexicanas en esa época estaban dominadas por la fisiología del sueño. Figuras extraordinarias como Raúl Hernández Peón, que por supuesto la mayoría de las personas que están aquí no pueden saber quién fue, pero era un pionero de los mecanismos del sustrato biológico que nos hace que estemos despiertos y que estamos dormidos y que podamos dormir. La figura se llamaba Giuseppe Moruzzi. Después, como todos, tuvo que irse de la figura paterna, se fue a Parma y desde entonces ha estado en Parma trabajando como profesor de fisiología, profesor emérito. Además, aquí he puesto unas cuantas asociaciones a academias, pero podría llenar unas 2, 3, 5 diapositivas con premios y reconocimientos. Les pongo solamente estos, que es miembro extranjero de la Academia Nacional de Ciencias de los Estados Unidos, miembro de la Academia Nacional de los Linces. A mí me encanta, me emociona de los linces, que quiere decir que tiene una visión muy aguda, estos animales. Esto es en la Academia Nacional de Ciencias de Italia. O sea, son los linces, son las personas con una visión más aguda y por lo tanto de pensamiento. Miembro de la Academia Americana de Artes y Ciencias de los Estados Unidos miembro de la Academia Europea, Premio Princesa de Asturias de Ciencia y Tecnología en el 2011. Este premio es muy codiciado porque lo da esta fundación y es por mucho superior en dinero al Premio Nobel y probablemente tiene el mismo reconocimiento, que es un premio de neurociencias, un premio sobre el cerebro. Entonces, simplemente por nombrar unas cuantas cosas, que esta es su historia académica y prácticamente la puedo mirar, la visualizar. Sus primeros trabajos se enfocaron en la fisiología del sueño y la visión. Yo también anduve metido en la fisiología del sueño. Entre sus principales contribuciones se encuentra la descripción de neuronas que codifican conductas motoras intencionales y que se va a hablar ampliamente durante esta noche, y neuronas que codifican el espacio peripersonal. Pero sobre todo, él es ampliamente conocido y reconocido en el mundo como el descubridor de las neuronas espejo y famoso por su teoría motora de la atención. Y yo cuando me pongo a pensar en este tipo de cosas es que a donde yo vaya a Sonora, vaya a Tamaulipas, a Yucatán, Michoacán y otras partes, siempre las señoras y los señores me hablan de las neuronas espejo. Entonces, pues, Giacomo, I would let you all the space for 50 minutes to talk on what you want to talk today. Gracias por estar con nosotros. Si le puedo poner.
What about the computer? Well, first of all, I have to thank the college for this prestigious invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank also the coordinator, in particular Ranulfo Romo and Pablo Rudomin, for inviting me here. The presentation was very generous, and I thank Ranulfo for it. Well, let's start now with my conference, which concerns mirror neurons. These neurons are neurons which we discovered about 20 years ago in the premotor cortex of the monkey. And these neurons have this particular characteristic, that they are motor neurons, so they fire when the monkey makes an action, but surprisingly, they fire also when the monkey observes another person doing this action. That was being discovered 20 years ago. Now, many things changed in this year. And what was a kind of strange neuron, that was a bizarre neuron, turned out to be something much more important. So this transformation from a sensory representation to a motor representation turns out to be a basic of many of our capability, including the capacity to understand emotions. However, I will start from the beginning. I will go step by step, showing first our original experiment, and then what are the consequences of it in these more recent years. So, at the end of the 80s, it turned out that motor cortex was much more complex than we thought. Traditionally, even in the textbook of neurology, it's written we have two areas, area 18, 19, two homunculi, one on the lateral surface, the other on the medial surface. So in those areas, the work of many labs, including Peter Strick, for example, and our own, showed that motor cortex is made by several areas. Here you see the picture that we proposed using the work of Matteo Castelli, Lupino, and myself. There are 7 different areas. But if you have several areas, you also are interested. What is their function? Why are they there? Why should be 7, not 2 or 3? So we started the study of this area. And in particular, today I am going to speak about F5, premotor cortex. We use the classical system, so we record the action potential from this neuron. And the task is, when you have an action potential, is isolated, try to understand what it's for, what it's responding to, which are the stimuli, and so on. Well, we use this technique, but we have an approach which was not very physical. Typically, people who study motor system are interested in trajectory, in acceleration, in velocity, in these parameters. So we adapted a very ethological approach. So we studied what happens when the monkey grasps things or refuses it, breaks it, holds, and so on. So that gives us many interesting findings. For example, the first one, that contrary to what we learned from neurological textbook and physiological textbook, in this area, what is encoded is not the movement. Movement is something like that. It's a displacement of a joint, but it's encoded motor act. So if you see this slide, you see that the same neuron fire when the monkey grasps with the right hand, with the left hand, and with the mouth. In a sense, talking today with Richard, I think that I can conclude that here is a semantic of the movement. It's represented the action, the motor act, the goal. It's grasping. It's not that it's doing with the right hand, with the left hand. Some people ask me, but in a sense you are going towards something very abstract. It's not abstract, it's still related to the motor system, but it's the goal which is represented and not simply the movement. Well, the other surprise was related to visual properties. So many neurons in this area respond to visual stimuli. And the first were discovered by Gentilucci and myself when we noticed that there were neurons which fire, motor neurons, when the monkey grasped it like that, but also when we show it to the monkey erasing a small object. The monkey was still doing nothing. And yet, this raising was transformed in something motor. And other neurons, for example, there are force grip with force. In this case, big object like an apple. It was. In the same time, Hideo Sakata, incidentally, Hideo Sakata was a student of Mount Kessel. So Hideo found neurons in the parietal lobe with similar property. We collaborated, and Hideo was much more technically oriented than we, so he provided us with specific apparatus, and we could demonstrate the existence of these canonical neurons. Now we call them in this way, that here, we call them canonical neurons. Why this name? Because in a sense it was not dramatically new. You have to a mechanism which transform the affordance of the object in the motor. So that was clear. But surprise was that sometimes we have a neuron in which we presented some interesting object, food, raisin, something which monkey likes, but nothing happens. They were not canonical neurons. They don't respond to objects, but they responded when the monkey saw a person grasping an object or another monkey. So you see in B, it's the classical motor activity, but in A, something strange. It's the motor neurons which respond to the vision of action made by another person. Now, I will see a picture which is already a movie, which I saw many times. Not here. So where is the... If I will be able to find my pointer. Now, where is that? Okay, yeah. Okay. Now, what you will hear its action potential. Here is a discharge of a neuron. It's a grasping neuron. And you have to correlate with the noise. Monkey is grasping and there is a discharge. Grasping is discharge. The person is grasping and there is discharge.
Fai ancora.
Prova con questo, vedi?
Prova con uno dei tuoi degli stimoli che lei conosce.
You see, this neuron clearly encode the goal of action, both when the monkey is doing the action and when the other person is doing. And also with the mouse. Sometimes the people is laughing when see Fogassi, who is the young, in that time, very young student, put the object in the mouth. But that's the same principle. So the monkey understands the concept of grasping. Somebody is grasping. Well, one can say maybe it's an artifact, maybe the monkey is moving. So some other neurons, like this one, allows us to eliminate this possibility. You see, grasping is not effective in this case, it's in C, but in A is the effective stimulus, a stimulus which is breaking into parts. And also when the monkey tends to break the object, there is a discharge. So that's something which the monkey cannot imitate just sitting in front of us. One important point that sometimes has been missed by people, that there are two types of mirror neurons, those broadly tuned and those which are strictly tuned. For example, if you see here in the lower row, there is grasping by precision grip, excellent discharge, grasping with the whole hand, very bad discharge. However, when the monkey sees grasping, it doesn't care if its grasping is done with 2 fingers or with the whole hand. This is a typically broadly tuned neuron. Sometimes we have those very precise, but in the monkey, they are very few. And I think that's the reason why imitation in monkey are so bad, in humans is good. But now, that's something recent. We use this new type of electrodes, which we are using also in humans, which allow us to have many neurons. Before, it was very hard. One single neuron for 1 day or 2 days of work. Now we have many neurons, so because we can record from the shaft, not only from the tip. And that's the data which has been obtained by Bonini and others recently. So in F5, still the majority are purely motor, but you see that there are many neurons which respond in a canonical way or as mirror neurons. Now, what is the reason to have? Why the motor system must have these visual responses? Here I like to quote, I quoted also 2 days ago when we have the talk at Aleph, this sentence by Marc Généraux. Marc Généraux wrote in 2004 that a mere visual perception without involvement of the motor system would only provide a description of the visible aspect. So vision gives you a visible aspect, but you don't understand really the action because you need intrinsic components of the observed action. They are critical for understanding and what is goal, and how to reproduce, also for imitation. That is particularly valid for humans. Well, the people said, you say it's for understanding, but you present also one type of stimuli. What about auditory stimuli? If you are in your hotel and you hear somebody walking, you understand that there is walking. So we don't need to see an action to understand what's going on. So we did a simple experiment. The monkey first saw an experimenter tearing a sheet of paper into pieces. You see this kind of hill is the histogram showing that the response is very good. And then we put a screen. At this point, the monkey doesn't see anything, but hear the sound, and yet the neuron says it's walking, it's grasping, it's breaking. Here is a good control. Here it's only white noise, no response. And here we put also some chimpanzee shouting calls in order to scare the monkey, but still was no response, was not something relating to emotional aspects. Well, now, so the sentence of General, I think, can be explained. Let's imagine that you go in England and see a cricket game. What do you understand? I understand almost nothing. And I suppose the same happened for Americans when they come to Europe and see a soccer team. They say very boring, nothing happens, only occasionally one goal. So if you don't have played something, you don't understand what's going on really. And to make you an example more scientific, there is a paper who examines the probability that a professional basketball player will know if the ball just throw. They show only the very beginning, the hand at the beginning of trajectory. A professional player knows if he will go to the basket or not. For other people, even not professional, it's not so. They make a lot of mistakes. They don't know. Another example to indicate how important is the motor aspect is an experiment made in England, in London, in which they showed dancing to professional dancer or to naive people, or even to dancer, but in another type of dancing, like capoeira. The result was radically different. So if you show to a professional dancer, to body dancing, you have an activation of the motor cortex, which is tremendously strong. For the other people, it's very weak, because they see the movement, but they don't have this, what Janero called the intrinsic capacity to understand what is going on. Well, I don't want to go in more detail, but we, with Giorman and other people, were able to trace the circuit which originate mirror neurons. It starts from an area called STS, which has been studied by David Perret. So it's not a miracle that at a certain point you have visual and motor representation together, but it's progressive. And an important role is played by the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is really the hub in which the two things go together at the motor system. Parietal lobe has a lot of motor activity, by the way. Well, monkey. What about human? We did the experiment in human almost immediately. In '96, as soon we were sure that there is mirror neurons in monkey, we went to Milano and we did PET experiment, positron emission tomography, and that was the best technique at the time. And we demonstrated that when a subject is looking, observing action, there is activation of the motor system. And then there was started a lot of experiments, some of them also by myself in Los Angeles with Scott Grafton and Michael Arby. But what I show you here, it's a meta-analysis done in Germany on 100 cases. And you see it's very clear that also in human, we have this activation of higher order visual areas than parietal lobe, than premotor cortex. I told you before that what counts is the goal. There is goal representation there. That's a more recent experiment in which we presented to students. The students are lying in a scanner. A very simple action, which is made either by the hand or by a robotic hand. The difference is dramatic because the robotic hand have a kinematics completely different, and if you look at the shape, although it seems a hand, it's clearly not a human hand. Well, the general circuit was present in both cases, indicated the common goal was understood by its grasping, but there was something specific. If we make the subtraction, you can see in the lowest panel, the arrow indicate activation inferior part of left parietal lobe. Then we did other experiments with other tools, and still is this part. In the same year, it has been demonstrated by Frey Scott that when you use a tool, you have activation of this part of the brain. So again, we have a motor part, which is here, and when you observe the action, you have the activation of the same part. So it starts with your capacity to do something, and then the observation activates it. And for neurologists, the tool use, it's a part of ideomotor apraxia, and if you have a lesion of the left parietal lobe very frequently, you can have this symptom. Well, now let's move to something more sophisticated. When we discovered mirror neurons, there were some people who were over-enthusiastic. Oh, we know how we understand action. Actually, that's true only for some action, not for all action. So we did an experiment in Parma with Buccino, which is split into two parts. In the first part, we showed actions which are common to different species. So everybody is able to bite. The dog is biting, humans are biting, monkeys are biting. Second part of experiment, we showed something which is specific for a species. So the student saw somebody, an actor, reading a newspaper, but no voice, only lip reading. The monkey was making what ethologists call it lip smacking. It's an affiliative gesture. If I have to indicate what happens for humans, imagine that you are in a lift and you see somebody, you look at him, then you look out, then you say, oh, the weather is nice today. Something of this embarrassing behavior is what the monkey do with this smacking. They try to communicate that everything is okay, don't worry. And the dog was barking. So we have these three type of action which is specific for a single species. And here is the result. The first one indicated biting. Look at the left hemisphere, which is on your right. Well, are the same red spot. So the activation is very similar. The action is the same, biting is the same, and so who is biting is the same. Probably this is one of the bases of some people have this humanization of animals because many of action of animals are similar to ours. But here, water. Can I have some water? It's open. But here is the second part of the experiment. Now, if you look, it's completely different. So when you see lip reading, you have activation of Broca's area and other center related to language. For dog, it's crucial because when we see a dog barking, all students understood that the dog was barking. There was no doubt we make a briefing after the experiment, but there is only activation of the visual area. Why? Because we don't have a motor program for barking. We can imitate the sound, saying bow, bow, how, wow, something of that, but we don't have a motor program for barking. So how we understand barking? In what philosophers call inferential way. So we infer what we saw, putting together visual information, previous information about dogs and so on. So, but we don't understand it phenomenologically. There is no copy of barking in our. So you see the big difference. Now we arrive at an important conclusion that we recognize action of others in two radically different ways. One is a la Sherlock Holmes. We reason about that and decide what it is. The other is phenomenological. What is the transformation of information which is sensory to motor information. And we immediately know that. With Corrado Sinigalia, a philosopher from Milano, which we work at, we call it understanding from the inside. That's the phenomenological way. You understand because you have already a model inside yourself. Now, I think the time is fast, so I will go to mechanism of emotion. With some students, especially two students, one from Lebanon, Gezzini, and one Italian, Caruana, we decided to study the insula. And again, we started with the monkey, and then we moved to human. So the first experiment I am going to show you, it's a stimulation of the insula. Insula is a rather complex structure. Sometimes the people make a lot of confusion of it, but it's a complicated structure. And the stimulation, we use it, a rather prolonged stimulation, like Graziano used it in his experiment. And demonstrate there are different parts of insula with different, for example, the yellow part, the ventral part, produces some emotional response, but I don't want to speak about that in the moment. Look at B. In B, there are a big red zone and a big blue zone. There is also a small green part, but the responses of this small green part was unclear, so we have not understood. But the other two was very clear, and I'm going to show you. So now will be no action potential because we stimulated. You have to correlate the activity of the monkey, what the monkey is doing, with the appearance of a red dot. Stimulation. Stimulation. I think it's very clear that every time we stimulate, there is ingestive behavior. The monkey is moving the lip, is moving the tongue. So the upper part of the rostral insula is related to ingestive behavior. Incidentally, there is evidence from human experiments that if you stimulate this part, the people have the similar behavior. But now I move electrode a bit ventrally down, and I am in the blue zone. And now you will see here. Perché? Ah, okay. Red light. Red light. No, I'm sorry. It's not this one, but this one. This is stimulation of the ventral part. Monkey is not happy. Now we give some food. She observes it, eats, red light. No. Peanuts. Surprise, something very good, but I feel bad. He throws it. It's really, you imagine to have double sensation. You have something excellent, very good in your, and you refuse it. Here was a rewarding moment. You see the surprise. So she feels disgust. I cannot understand why this good food became disgusting. But what is important for us, that if you stimulate the ventral part of anterior insula, you have a disgust. So you have positive ingestive and negative ingestion in the ventral part. Well, now humans. Here is a fMRI experiment, which I did with Christian Kaiser and Vittorio Gallese. And again, it's a fMRI experiment subdivided in two parts. In the first part, a natural stimulus. That's why we went to France to do this experiment. This has been carried out in the lab of Bruno Vicaire in Marseille, because they are very good in administrating odorant. So in the nose of the subject was given either something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And let's concentrate on unpleasant, which is rotten eggs. Rotten eggs is an excellent stimulus. First part of the experiment. Second part of the experiment, the people see actor, which you see here, of Marseille Theatre, expressing disgust. Remember, this is a person expressing disgust. He's not disgusted at all. He's a normal young man. Okay, the result. First part of the experiment, rotten eggs. Look at the section in B, and you see a strong activation of the insula on both sides, this red spot. The anterior insula is active. That was not original experiment result, because other people have found before us the same thing. The interesting is here. Now you have parasagittal section. Look, there is white spot while spots indicate that this voxel has been activated both by natural stimulus and by observing social stimulus, the guy who is disgusted. You see the importance. If I have the same neurons which are activated in both cases, it's not a cognition, it's not a cognitive process, but it's exactly the same neuron. So I feel exactly as you feel. It's empathy. But empathy for us is the capacity to enter in the same state of the other, not to be good, we can discuss about that. But you imagine, which is the strongest thing that I can have. So I have the same population of neurons, not a single neuron, but the same population of neurons which became active in two radically different conditions. One is something disgusting in your nose, rotten eggs. The other, you see a person which expresses. I want to tell you that water? No, the water. Thank you. The disgust is not some secondary emotion. According to Darwin, it's one of the most important. He discussed a lot about disgust. And it's obvious, because disgust is very important to prevent that you eat something which is dangerous for you, and so it's prevent damage to the whole tribe, to the species, and so on. Well, it means that we have a system which allows us to feel, not to understand the other, to feel exactly as another person feels. And that's completely different from cognitive capacity. I can understand also using cognitive capacity. For example, I can read something that terrible happened in Iraq. Well, I can feel pain for that, but it's not the same if I go out in the street and see somebody which is in pain. There are data which indicate the pain is encoded in this way. So there are neurons, has been demonstrated first by Hutchinson, there are neurons which discharge both, one you feel, one the person, the patient, feel pain, and one see a needle going in the hand of the surgeon. So that's extremely, I think, important finding also socially, that we have two ways to understand, exactly for the other, for the cold action, but in this case it's much more important. So you understand and you feel the same thing, but it's necessary. First of all, it's not mean to be good, because you can be also very bad. There is an experiment made on sadistic criminal. Sadistic criminal understand very well the emotion of others, but they don't behave well, of course. So one thing, then another important thing is that we have a system of control it. I mentioned, for example, yesterday, but also now in the interview, the policemen, the special forces. The special forces cannot be good. They see blood, they do it, but that's their business. So you can train people, you can modify this mechanism. This mechanism is present, it's in children, they probably are the basis of this mother-child relation which Daniel Stern described so well, but it can be modified. And now, that's because Pablo Rudomin asked me to say a few words, which I was reluctant to say in this audience, but that's not science, that's rather politics. What happened in Germany in the 20s and the 30s? Do you imagine a population which is the most civilized probably in the world, which produces genius like Beethoven. We still in Europe sing Beethoven music as a hymn of Europe. And that abruptly makes terrible things as their behavior with Jews. How it happened? Well, the only explanation that not only me, but also many sociologists have, that in a sense, the propaganda by Goebbels, which was a genius, with radio, he described why the Germany lost the war, because among us there is some people who are not real men, they are Untermenschen, they don't understand the high destiny of our Reich, and so on. And so at this point, if you decide that this guy in front of me is not a man, but is under man, is kind of primate, well, and he's also, well, dangerous for the society, kill him. Why not? And if you read the book by Arendt on Eichmann process, Eichmann is a nice guy. He's not a monster. Don't think that these people who killed the Jews, they were monsters. They were people with distorted brain. Because what Eichmann has been interviewed by 3 psychiatrists. All of them said he's completely normal. And the judgment of one of them is that it's a person with noble interest and noble sentiment. He loves his family. He loves children. He loves nature. So they're an excellent guy. And then he organized the transportation of Jews from Budapest to Auschwitz. Why? Because for him, when the judge asked him, how you did that? He said, well, but you know, I received the order to transport something. If they were trees or cattle of Jews, for me it's the same, because they are not real men. You see the danger of this position. So this natural tendency that we have to be with the other should be encouraged, not destroyed. And if you read many books, starting from Bible to some Oriental, there is a strength, attempt to maintain this rather than destroy. But there are also people who try to destroy it. Well, that's especially for Pablo, who asked me to say a few words about that. But now I want to finish with something which myself, but I think practically everybody, read the first paper on fMRI. We were extremely excited. Finally, we can read what's going in the brain without nothing could damage that. But now, after 20 years of study, you can say there is 3 weak points. You must keep the person still in the scanner, so it's completely non-ethological. You cannot study the motor system because you have artifacts due to magnetic field. Then the data are only correlative. For example, I mentioned it about pain, but some neurons which had been recorded from single gyrus and was claimed to be important for pain, actually are not for pain, but for any type of stimulus which produce distress. So you have a correlation. All fMRI, you have correlation. When you read that some important psychological processes are encoded in the insula, be very cautious, probably not. And the same for cingulate. Because imagine a task like Posner did with Stroop effect. So Stroop effect is important cingulate. Not true. Stroop effect became active in many, many other occasions where there is a stress. So if you have to solve a psychological thing and you are in stress, you have activation of cingulate. But it doesn't mean that that's for Stroop effect or for something else. So that's very important that to go beyond correlative data. And then there is no time. So our life, it's in time. What gives us fMRI? Give us a picture. But the life is a film, it's not a picture. Now I will give you, my time is finishing, so only a few examples. Well, first I have to say what is the way to go beyond that. We start to collaborate with surgeons, and the merit essentially starts from France, where Talleyrand and Banco first invented so-called stereo EEG, then had been improved very much now in recent years because we have technology. So you have an epileptic patient, and it's not responsive to the drugs. What to do? The only way is to eliminate the epileptic focus. But you must know where is this focus. EEG can give you some indication, it's in the temporal lobe. But you must, if you want to eliminate, to do a surgery, you must to do it. So these people here, Lorusso is the surgeon, Ivana Sartori is a neurologist, run this center in Milan in which practically every week they operate one person. In order to operate, it's rather complicated because you must have first a structural brain, a structural MRI. You use the same electrode that I showed you before in the Bonini experiment, in which you can record from the shaft, and you put these red dots, you put inside the brain 16 of these electrodes. In each of them, you have 10 points. So you have 160 possibility to read the brain of this patient. The blue stuff indicates that you have avoid the vessels. And then it's really difficult, but they do. Now everything is so well computerized that you do it. Here is just to show you. I think it's art to put all these electrodes inside the brain without make bleeding. Well, now I will show you something very simple. Now, there is a criticism. Of course, you put electrodes not according to what the physiologists want, but you put electrodes according to clinical problem. So in each patient, you put in a different way. So you must have a big statistic in order to make good results. And here you show that this experiment, we will show in a moment, is based on 96 patients and 18,000 cortical leads. So, and you need, of course, good computer sciences to put the brain together one to another. That's why we use this system of finesse and of flat brain instead of normal brain. Now, that's a very simple clinical experiment. It's not invented by us. Before surgery, they stimulate peripheral nerve. One of them is median nerve. So they know where is located area S1. And if you stimulate it, forget about time, you see that there is this strong activation of many areas. Now, let's see with time what happens. After a few milliseconds, you have an activation in what is called S1, the somatosensory cortex. Subsequently, after 40 milliseconds, you go rostrally. There is activation of the motor cortex. But the most interesting thing is after 120 milliseconds, where is my water? After 120 milliseconds, the activation is in the perisylvian region. So completely different from S1, and we don't know why there is such a long, prolonged activation. And we guess that is something related to the finding of Romo, that S2 somehow take into consideration the first and the second activation rather than be specifically responding to the stimulus. But you see the big difference. So with fMRI, you don't see anything of this side. Everything is the same. Here, you see the difference. Here it's an experiment. Remember that these patients are in the ward and wait for several days until the neurologists know exactly where is the focus. And they are recorded day and night, both with EEG and with a camera. So they are there, and they are bored. They don't know what to do. They read the newspaper. But if I, as a psychology neurologist, said, please, do you want to collaborate in an experiment? They say yes. So one experiment we did is the following. It's very primitive, also it's very simple at our beginning. So we present an object, then it's a film, so the patient is just sitting and see a film. In the film, there is a hand, there is an object, then a hand grasping it, and that's it. Now, you will see now what happens if you don't think about time. All this black point is when the activity in those points is higher than baseline, significantly higher than baseline. So you see something in the occipital lobe, something in the frontal lobe, something even in S2. Now let's see the time. With the time, the black is the beginning when you see the object, the red when the action started, and here you see the mirror system active, because all this activity, it's observation of an action, and you see activation of parietal lobe, very clear, premotor cortex, and what was for us surprising, there is the blue dots, which are in S2 and in premotor cortex. So when I see an action of another, I have also some sensation when the action is finished, which we did not predict, we didn't know that. Finally, stimulation. We have time, the patient can move, but we can also stimulate the brain of this patient. And we did now, this is in press on brain, it's not finished, it's not published. So we explored the cingulate. Again, many cases, we look also old data. And what is clear, that the area which is called medial cingulate in blue determine a clear motor activation. Here you see the general picture, then I will show you. So the middle picture determines body directed or manipulatory or escaping thing. Then there are other things which I will not discuss today, but think about the left stuff. Now I will show a film of a subject in which we stimulate the cingulate in this motor part.
Uno, due, tre, quattro, cinque, sei.
Che c'è? Cosa è successo?
Tu vuoi andare via?
Cioè?
Hai sentito che vuoi andare via così?
So in other words, he said, I have an urge to go away. And he tried to move. And that has been repeated. By the way, we look at the old literature, and Talleyrand many years ago described the same thing. So this area, very ancient area, cingulate, is an area which prepare movement. I have the urge to move. Now, if you put a psychological thing which give you some kind of stress and so on, you can have this activation. So that's why the correlation is so important. And now I will conclude with another region that we already published, that we stimulate also the region, we call it PAC, which means the part which is the most anterior, it's pregenual, in front of the corpus callosum. Remember, same situation, the girl which should be operated is in the ward, and we stimulate this part in order to see where is her epileptic seizure. Now, the standard procedure that now is used in Milano is to ask to put the hand in this position and to read. And so it's standard, and you see what happens sometimes, the eye movements. Well, see what happens here.
Sella, muro, coltello, maestra, ferro, gatto, arancio, pulsante, auto, porchino. No, è venuto un attimo di...
Da ridere?
Sì.
So the question was, you're laughing? Yes. Why? Most of patients don't know why. They say, I start laughing, I don't know. Some are more intellectual. They say, it came to my mind, a funny story or something like that. But essentially, and we have many patients of this sort. So if you stimulate this part, the people start laughing. Then we have an idea to show a movie to these people in which was a person crying, laughing, or neutral. The red line indicates the activation of gamma, the gamma band. We are working on gamma band, a very high frequency, and you see the difference, a highly significant difference from observing somebody laughing or other thing. So it's a clear mirror effect. So we have an area which produces laughing, and when I see somebody laughing, I understand that you are laughing because it produces an activation of the same neuron which, when activated by ourselves, produce laughing. Of course, there is a big circuit. Now there is a group in my lab which is studying all the descending pathways with different techniques, but the core is there. Now the final message is that we understand things not by mere association. I think it was a big historical error to think that everything starts with association like taught Hume, Locke, Berkeley, and so on. I think most of our basic things are based on the fact that we have internal representation of laughing, of crying, of pain, of fear, and so on. So we understand the other because we map what the other do on ourselves. The big advantage of this system is its solidity, because it's not I have to associate the things together, but I have inside myself something which allows me, for example, to understand laughing. I will finish only one caveat. Of course, not everything is already prepared at birth. We know that some part of mirror system evolve with age, with experience, and so on. When I mentioned the soccer game or what was cricket, of course, there is. The best experiment in this sense has been done in Holland with small children. If you have a kid which is unable to walk and you show a movie of somebody walking, nothing happens in his brain because he's unable to walk. As soon as he's able to walk, presentation of film in which a kid is walking determine activation. And to finish, when he's only, the same boy or girl are only able to crawl, showing a crawling moving, so body crawling, produce activation. So indicate with maturation, with your more experience of motor experience, you understand more things. So there are two things. One is the internal representation, which probably you are bored with. You know how vomiting, you don't learn vomiting. Then there is other part of our skills, which are learned, and more skills we have, better we understand the world and the others. Thank you.
¿Puede pasar el sonido, por favor? Giacomo, muchas gracias. Cuando Giacomo estaba hablando al final, en sus conclusiones, me acordé de la médula espinal. I was thinking in the spinal cord, where you have CPGs, Central Pattern Generators. Yeah. Son patrones que se generan en la médula espinal y que nos permiten liberarnos with simple walk. Entonces, la pregunta que yo le haría a Giacomo, antes de pasarles, por supuesto, el micrófono a ustedes, es si este mecanismo evolutivo que tenemos en el cerebro, about internal representations, you can follow me. Yes. You follow. Este mecanismo interno que tenemos en el cerebro es un requisito interno mucho antes de que nosotros hagamos conscientes nuestros actos.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, this system that we have in the spinal cord really is an excellent model on in general how the brain works. And there is a very nice paper on the control of this system, which indicates that basal ganglia, for example, control very nicely this activity. So I think it's layer after layer. We start with something which is model, but then we control it with a more complex structure.
Gracias. ¿Tendrán alguna pregunta? Unos, dos, tres preguntas. Allá, por favor. Puedes hacerlo en inglés.
En inglés.
Hi, Giacomo. Very nice talk. Thank you. I was very surprised of the stimulation of the insular cortex results, that you have a feeding part of the insula and a aversive region, which is basically the Charles Zucker results in mice. He also has found these two parts of the brain that encode feeding and appetitive and aversive behavior. So have you...
Have appetitive, you have disgust.
And disgust, yeah. And he called it taste, like a sucrose hotspot and a bitter hotspot, but I think your approach is more precise, like appetitive and aversive parts. Have you made recordings in the insula in these regions of single neurons, and these neurons are responding only to appetitive oromotor responses or to disgust in the aversive region?
Well, we have never recorded single neurons from there, but there are data by roles, for example, very nice data that indicate in the upper part of it. There is many neurons which respond to taste, to the structure of the food, and so on. So as far as ingestive part, I think it's very well proven. You know, about the disgust, I don't know study with single neurons, but certainly there is data from Stereo AG made in France. Krolak-Simon is the first name, in which you stimulate there, the person have a tendency to vomit.
Following the same question about the insular cortex, it's possible that the insular cortex is more related with circuits, is mirror circuits more than mirror cells.
Well, I agree with you. I think the brain is made by circuit, but there are some nodes which are more important. For disgust, for example, the node is in the insula, but of course, when you vomit, you have an activity of many other centers, including the vagus nerve and so on. For example, for laughing, the facial nerve. Even in the monkey, there is a strong connection between this part of the cingulate and the facial nerve, which for laughing is very important. And I think the hippocampus is very important in all this type of behavior. Sometimes we forget it, it's not very fashionable now, but the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, it's really very important. So I don't deny also because even for laughing, of course, you have to see a laughing person, otherwise how you can laugh. So the connections are very important.
Thank you.
When we talk about learning an activity like playing football or maybe dancing, we usually don't see ourselves in a mirror. So my question is, how do you think we learn to associate the behavior we see in others with the equivalent action we make in order to activate the mirror neurons?
No, I have not understood your question completely.
It's like every time we perform an action,
yes.
We don't know how do we look like. So my question is, how do we relate the behavior in others with our own behavior in order to activate our own mirror neurons?
So now if I understood you say, how is it possible that we have mirror neurons? Well, one hypothesis, for example, is that mirror neurons are a byproduct of your capacity to control your hand. When you are a small child, you look continuously at your hand and you learn how to move. Then when you see the head of another person, you generalize and you see the same action. That has been formalized with Michael Arbit with a model. Something, however, I think it's innate. I mentioned it before, vomiting. I don't think you learn to vomit because you see another boy vomiting or another girl vomiting, but that's innate. And laughing, it's innate. Children practically immediately respond to the smiling of the mother with smiling. So part of it, the other, you're right. And in the Arbib idea, the only weak point is how we learn also the facial expression to imitate, because you have to look. But maybe most of facial expression are related to emotion. So it's not cold stuff, it's rather emotional. But it's a very good point.
Give me this. This is your water.
This is my water, that's not.
Well, congratulations, Giacomo. I would like you to discuss a little bit about the relationships between mirror neurons, the system, and autism. I think it's a very important issue, and you have been a pioneer on those things, which I would like to discuss on those, your views about that.
Well, I must confess that I started autism reading literature rather than looking at the patient. And my impression, reading literature, everything was just a matter of theory of mind, a very popular term, or some social interaction. When you see to this kid, you see there is a very complex pattern, which there are some of them which are highly intelligent, sometimes have a very low IQ, so-called low functioning. Many of them have epileptic seizures, which really impair their capacity tremendously. So it's, and the other thing, which I think psychologists completely miss it, that these people, practically all of them, have small motor deficit. So what we proposed is that it's true that the social relationship are impaired, but you have to look early when you see if there is a motor deficit already present, because if you don't have motor deficit, you cannot develop mirror system, and so if you don't develop mirror system, you don't have good relationship. So I think now some people misinterpret our data. For example, Ramachandra, who was for us a great man who made a lot of propaganda for us. But in this case, he wrote a paper in Scientific American, Autism is Broken Mirror, which was a very bad reaction from many neurologists and so on, because it's exaggerated. But I think we have a merit to say that, look, you have to observe children with motor deficit, and not to say, oh, well, my grandfather also has some motor deficit. Oh, also my other son has. No, if you have motor deficit, you have to show to a neurologist, to a psychologist, because if you start early the therapy, the results are excellent. And there are really now proofs, especially coming from, I mentioned Sally Rogers, because I saw her film, are beautiful. So I still think that mirror system is strongly involved in the disease. But to say only mirror neurons, no, I think there is much more than that.
Por favor. Giacomo, muchas gracias. Thanks a lot for your talk. I appreciate very much. Muchas gracias por acompañar a Giacomo a un viaje tan largo desde Parma para estar con nosotros. Desde hace mucho queríamos invitarte al Colegio Nacional.
Okay. I hope so. I hope so.
It's a great pleasure to having you here. And thanks a lot.
Well,
Gracias.
Thank you.
Bueno, como ya lo dije, ha sido una tarde extraordinaria con la presentación de Giacomo Rizzolatti, y tengo el gusto ahora de presentar a nuestro segundo conferencista, el doctor Richard Andersen. Él estudió bioquímica en la Universidad de California en 1973, hizo un doctorado en la Universidad de California también, con uno de los grandes científicos de Estados Unidos en su época, creo que es Michael Merzenich. ¿Es correcto? Sí. Y después hizo un postdoctorado en la Universidad de Johns Hopkins, donde colaboró con Vernon Castle. Él llegó mucho antes que yo a trabajar con Vernon Castle, y en su tiempo estaban muy interesados en estudiar la conducta, los procesos visuomotores. Y Richard Andersen ahí hizo una observación seminal, creo que es puramente de él. Descubrió que el mecanismo cerebral en la corteza parietal, que tiene que ver que nosotros atendamos eventos en el mundo externo. No solamente vemos y miramos, oímos y escuchamos, sino que también en nuestro cerebro existe un mecanismo que amplifica las señales y hace que nosotros podamos atenderlas. A él le gusta viajar. Ha estado en muchos sitios, en el Instituto Salk en esta época, en el MIT en este periodo, y finalmente en 1994 él decidió ya quedarse allí, quedarse quieto para hacer su trabajo. Y desde entonces para acá es profesor en Caltech, con este nombramiento, y director de este centro, que son muy reputados en Estados Unidos, porque esta fundación otorga financiamiento a unos cuantos centros de investigación a lo largo de los Estados Unidos. Obviamente, al igual que Giacomo, tiene grandes nombramientos como miembro de la Academia Nacional de Estados Unidos, y recuerdo muy bien esta fecha porque hicimos una larga caminata en Washington juntos antes de la elección a la Academia, miembro de la Academia Americana de Artes y Ciencias, este premio que es muy reputado en la Universidad de Columbia, este premio que viene de la misma fundación, y el último es el premio de la NASA y tiene una cantidad de reconocimientos y está on call, sobre demanda. Y yo agradezco muchísimo que Richard nos haya acompañado esta noche. Bueno, estos son sus grandes contribuciones, como al igual que Giacomo, le interesó la arquitectura, cómo están las áreas cerebrales que sustentan las funciones cerebrales. Descubrió que la corteza cerebral, como ya lo dijo, integra información de manera multiplicada. Sí. Fue de los primeros en utilizar modelos de redes para entender mucho más allá simplemente de una descripción de las respuestas de las neuronas en las tareas, como lo hacemos muchos de nosotros. Y como ya lo dije, descubrió que las neuronas de la corteza parietal posterior, en esta parte más o menos de nuestro cerebro, codifican la posición de los ojos, que es algo muy importante, saber dónde tenemos los ojos, y la posición de la mano, y también hay que saber dónde anda la mano, y cómo estas señales se combinan para la coordinación motora. Y sobre todo últimamente se ha interesado mucho por el desarrollo tecnológico y con el conocimiento que se ha adquirido acerca de la función cerebral, que ya se puede ir directamente a los circuitos cerebrales del ser humano. Y verdaderamente él es pionero en este tipo de cosas y con una tremenda esperanza, sobre todo, con implicaciones profundas para la ayuda para muchos pacientes que han perdido ya la capacidad de moverse, de pensar, tener intencionalidad, etcétera, etcétera. Y verdaderamente lo que van a ver en un minuto es muy dramático, como es el hecho del desarrollo de neuroprótesis, que tiene que ver de que se puede leer la actividad del cerebro, cuando el cerebro está pensando hacer algo, pasársela a una máquina que pueda hacer cosas por nosotros, cuando ya nosotros hemos perdido esa capacidad. Richard, it's a pleasure having you here, and please come in front and take the microphone. You are all by yourself now. Gracias.
Oh, computer, yeah. Hard to give a talk without a computer. Well, thank you, Ranulfo, for that really wonderful introduction. Also, I thank you, Pablo, and members of College Nacional for inviting me here today. And I'll be talking about human-machine interfaces for recording intentions and also for stimulating sensations. And just to outline the talk, I'll first say what a brain-machine interface is. Then I'll discuss some theories of the organization of the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is the part of the brain in which we record signals. Then I'll proceed with showing you examples of recording intention signals from high-level areas, a high-level area of the cerebral cortex that Ranulfo mentioned, the posterior parietal cortex. Then I'll discuss how the cerebral cortex encodes information. And in particular, I'll emphasize a partially mixed selectivity, which is what we think is how many parts of the high-order cortex encode information. So this will, in a sense, be a new theory for cortical organization. And then finally, I'll discuss stimulation of evoked sensations. These could make for a bidirectional interface. So that would be an interface that both you can send out signals of intention, but then also you can feedback or write in the sensory consequences of your activations. So brain-machine interface is a device that can provide communication between a brain and a machine. And as I mentioned, this communication can be bidirectional. So we can write signals into the brain, and this is usually done through electrical stimulation. The signals can be read out of the brain, usually through electrical recordings, and of course in that case you need to, if you're going to read out signals, you have to decode the meaning of the neural activity. So some examples of brain-machine interfaces you might be familiar with, and actually even our commercial products. One that's been very successful is the cochlear prosthetic. So this helps people that are deaf to hear again. There's deep brain stimulation, which is used as a therapy for Parkinson's disease. There's also currently a lot of research and soon to be, or I think even in Europe, a market for retinal implants for blind people to stimulate the retina. And then also on the horizon is a functional electrical stimulation in which stimulation of the nerves that go to the muscles can activate a paralyzed limb. In our case, we're designing a neural prosthetic that can help for paralysis. And this just shows the basic flow diagram. You record a signal from the brain. You interpret the signal with a decoder, and that's used then to provide command signals to operate external devices. So there are many forms of paralysis that could benefit from this kind of technology. One in particular, which I'll be talking about today, is spinal cord injury. It can also be used for stroke, multiple sclerosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, and also certain forms of muscular dystrophy. So the cerebral cortex, that's when you see a brain, human brain, that's what you're seeing mostly is the cerebral cortex. It has about 20 billion neurons. It's essentially two sheets, and each one makes a hemisphere, and it's crumpled up so it can fit in the skull. So it's a couple of millimeters thick. You can see here this is a cross-section through the cerebral cortex, and if you were to spread it out, it'd be about a meter square for each hemisphere. And This amazing sheet, this amazing structure contains language, processes, perception, it also reasoning, movement, execution. So many really interesting high-level functions of humans are processed by this particular part of the brain. Also, we know that different areas of the cerebral cortex have different functions, and so I'll briefly go through kind of a history of ideas of how the cerebral cortex is organized. Early on in the 1700s, a popular idea was phrenology. Galen was one of the proponents. You can see that there are areas for consciousness, self-esteem, reverence, hope, anything you can imagine. So they believed that the brain was divided up, the cortex, into highly specific individual regions for different human qualities. And this received a big jolt of support from Paul Broca, who in 1861 presented the case of a patient he had who had a lesion to the frontal lobe, and this patient couldn't speak. So on autopsy, and if you go to a museum in Paris, you can actually still see his patient's brain. This gave rise to the idea of speech centers in the brain, and in particular, one named for him, Broca's area. Progressing further, neuroanatomists, Romo, a German neuroanatomist, divided the cerebral cortex based on the packing density and cell types within the cortex into about 50 different cortical areas, both in non-human primates and in humans. And this is kind of the ultimate splitting here. More recently, with the Connectome project, Van Essen and colleagues have added fMRI data and other data to now come up with about 180 different cortical regions. So that's kind of one view of the cerebral cortex, that it has a lot of these highly specialized individual regions. And an element of that is certainly true. On the other hand, we also know that there's distributed processing within the cerebral cortex. So when people first began doing fMRI studies in the 1990s, so they're looking at changes in blood flow with different tasks humans perform within a magnet, they immediately found for even simple tasks like planning a movement that it activates not a single area but multiple areas. Also, we know from neuroanatomy, if you trace connections in the brain, you can find that any cortical region is connected to at least 20 other cortical regions. So what this means is that, that there are actually distributed circuits that are responsible for behaviors, sensations, and other functions. There's also been an extreme view of the cerebral cortex, which is that it's kind of equipotentiality, that this was popularized by Carl Lashley. His equipotentiality idea was that any part of the cortex can take on the function of any other part of the cortex. And he found this, that if he scooped out of a rodent a part of the cortex, in a few days the rodent would seem fine again. And it was just as he took out more and more cortex that the rodent progressively degraded in his abilities. So with that as kind of a background, because we'll come back to this idea of how cortical areas are organized, we, in our experiments, early on looked at the visual input coming into the posterior parietal cortex, and that area then forms a bridge to project over to motor cortex where the commands for movements go out. And within this sensory motor pathway, we were curious, actually, when I was working with Mountcastle, as Ranulfo was mentioning, we were recording from these regions. And when I went on my own, we found an area that is very important for eye movements. It's called LIP, it's a lateral interparietal area. It's extremely popular now with neurophysiologists. Another area we found that was specific for reach movements, we called the parietal reach region. Giacomo mentioned that he and Hideo Sakata found AIP, which is an area specialized for grasping. And so we hypothesized that there's a map of intentions within the posterior parietal cortex. So you go from sensation to planning based on what you see or other sensory inputs, and then that goes over to inform motor cortex of what you intend to do. So you can see this is a bit like the functional parcellation here. We've divided the areas up into particular functions. So in the human studies, we thought, well, if we have this intention, we could record the intent of paralyzed patients and decode those and use them to help them to operate robotic arms or computers. And to do an experiment, we place an array of electrodes, actually 2 to 4 of these arrays. They each have 100, they're like 100 little needles, and we record the activity of a population of single neurons. So usually we can record from 1 to 200 neurons per implant, and we found with our subjects now, we have one that's out longer than 5 years. So these implants can remain functional for a very long time. Now, this will be important later on. You can see that they're extremely small. They're 4 by 4 millimeters. They have 400 micron spacings between the electrodes. And they're very much like fine wires. And when they are implanted in the brain, each electrode is in the vicinity of neurons, and we record the spiking of cells. So this was a little like Giacomo was showing with his mirror neurons. This is just an example of spiking cell, and we'll see examples of that in a human in a minute. So can you hear that? I guess the sound's not working. Yeah, I have it in the right spot. That works. If you play that too loud, everyone runs for the door in America. Okay. So we're recording these intent signals for cognitive neural prosthetics. And so the idea here is with the paralyzed patients, we record from patients with high spinal cord lesions. So they're tetraplegic and they can't move any of their 4 limbs. But they can take, say, if they wanted to grasp an object, they can take the visual signals in, process them, go through these intent circuits, decide what they want to do, but when they try to send the command out to the spinal cord to send signals to the muscle, that loop has been broken. So the idea is to record from this small population of neurons, and a couple groups, and you've probably seen it in the media, it's very popular over the last decade or so, I have concentrated on the motor cortex, and this makes a lot of sense. It's the area where the final output goes to activate the muscles. And in this area, you have a representation of the opposite side of the body. So if you implant, say, the hand area of motor cortex, it'll control the trajectory, or say the limb, of the contralateral limb, the limb opposite to the implant site. Now, from our non-human primate work, we knew that the posterior parietal cortex, which is higher level, we could get out trajectories like motor cortex, but we could also decode the goal of a movement. And so we could tell within 200 milliseconds where someone wanted to reach for an object. And in motor cortex, you have to evolve that over time. So you have to, over a second or so it takes to reach an area, it's providing you with just the trajectory. Another really amazing thing is that both limbs are represented within posterior parietal cortex. So both hands are active and represented there. So this allows for the possibility of bimanual control. And then, as Giacomo was mentioning, there are single neurons there that code entire grasp. And so you have some for power grip or fine pinch grip. And so in that case, it only requires one neuron, whereas if you're in the motor cortex, presumably you have to be involved with the many muscles involved with a hand posture. So this was our first subject, Eric Sorto. 5 years ago, we implanted 2 arrays within the posterior parietal cortex. And difficulty is surgical planning, because the posterior parietal cortex of each human, you can see the motor strip based on anatomical features that are common between people. But each person's posterior parietal cortex is very complicated and is different from individual to individual. So he's paralyzed. So how are we going to tell where to put that array? And what we do is we do the magnetic resonance imaging with the subjects, and we ask them to imagine actions. So we asked Eric to imagine grasping, and we think this is the human homologue of AIP. We also had him imagine reaching. This case, we implanted area 5, which is another reach area, which is up on the surface of the cortex, so our arrays could reach the neurons. Now, this is Eric 2 weeks after the implantation. So he's been paralyzed for 10 years, hasn't been able to move his limb. And so what he's going to do here is make a gesture like shaking hands with the graduate student.
Okay, see that? Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. That's cool, Matt, for my first thing. Come on.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. Holy crap, man.
So this was pretty amazing. It took no training. He just did it. And it was really a thrill for him, the first time he'd actually moved the limb in 10 years. And of course, a real thrill for us. We were very thrilled for him, and also that it worked. Now, we also found that he could, we would test single neurons. So we'd have a population of cells, but we could show him one of his neurons' activity, and he could imagine different ways to actually activate that single neuron. So in this case is a neuron where if he imagines making a windmill motion with his limb, that'll activate the cell. And if he imagines touching his nose, it'll inhibit the cell. And so again, what you'll see is the spiking over here, and this is just elongation of the spikes on the time axis.
Now silent. Fire. Silent. Fire. Silent. Fire. Silent. Fire. Okay. That's really, really cool.
So it was amazing. You know, he can go in and with his imagination activate single neurons within his brain. Of course, he's activating many more neurons, but still it's really quite an accomplishment. Now, this is just to demonstrate, we wanted to make the device be very intuitive and easy to use. Sometimes if you've seen movies of a patient with a motor cortex implant, they concentrate really hard on getting the movement to the location. And we were hoping that if you're using high-level intent, that this would be much more intuitive to the subject. So here he's moving the limb to the target. And you can see at the same time he's talking with the occupational therapist. So this is pretty much what we do naturally. You know, it's we're talking to someone while we're cooking or something like that. It was around Christmas time, and so this was the first time we tried playing rock, paper, scissors with Eric. This is just trying it out, and so this is a rocking Santa here, and if he makes the right gesture long enough, then he'll get a happy Santa Claus reward.
Okay.
Wrapping paper.
Is this working better? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The posture is probably. Okay.
So we've gone through various grasp tasks, and I thought I'd just show you a few snippets of grasping.
So, but is it like a relaxing swing, or is it like thinking of, I don't know, flowers and
That's great.
Right. 2 points.
We can make the hand gentle, but he likes crushing things. So in the lab now, we have a whole bunch of crushed cans up on the shelf. So as I mentioned, we were going for high-level intent. So our idea was once we get the intent of the subject, all the little details about the particular trajectories of the robotic limb and the fine details could be done with an intelligent robot. And so what we've done is created a hybrid system that takes in the intent of the subject and also uses machine vision to analyze the environment, and machine learning and within the robotic control system itself. So that sort of hybrid system then can, we hope, make for a much easier use of the robot limb. So you saw Ranulfo was running a video clip of this. This was, we asked the subjects for a goal that they hope to achieve. And what Eric wanted to achieve was to be able to drink on his own. So normally he has to have someone do it for him. So this was the first time that it worked successfully, where he was able to take a sip under his own control.
Very good. I'll pretend to drink my beer. Cheers.
All right.
Hey, you finished that thing off? That's good. And that's how science is made. All right.
There you go.
So you can see he was very happy. This is another of our subjects, Nancy Smith. She was paralyzed for 6 years from an auto accident, again, a high-level spinal cord lesion. And so this shows a different output device. Here she's operating a virtual reality display of fingers. We found with her, surprisingly, she could control all 10 fingers individually. So this was pretty amazing. And here's an example where her task is to move the virtual reality finger to the location of the target. And in this case, it's with the thumb. And now with the index finger. And this is with the other 3 fingers. So before her accident, Nancy could play piano, and so now we're having her play very simple tunes. So in this case, she'll be using the fingers on one hand and playing a computer version keyboard. So next, this is her saying what she was doing. This is a very nice thing working with humans, is you can ask them how they were actually performing a task.
Because I'm familiar with the tune, it felt like the keys just automatically hit themselves without me thinking about it. It just seemed like it knew the tune and it just did it on its own. Okay. But I didn't have to move my fingers to make it happen.
So I think this is a lot like when we're typing. We're not actually thinking about stroking our fingers. We're thinking about the words we're making and the letters. So again, it's kind of a high level intent, in this case, thinking of the notes that she used to actually play the tune. So as we went along, we found goals, trajectories, all the fingers could be controlled, different grasps, both sides of the body. We also found action observations and mirror neurons like Giacomo was talking about, and even activity related to mathematics. And this makes sense because it's kind of the digit area of the brain, and also imaging studies have shown that mathematical operations tend to occur on the left hemisphere of posterior parietal cortex. So we wondered, remember I showed how small that implant is, and it's just a couple of hundred neurons. And so we were wondering, how is it that we can know all of this from one tiny little plug? Now, it's great from a neuroprosthetic point of view because it means that you go to a high-level area and you can get out with a fairly minimal invasive technique a huge amount of information. But from a scientific perspective, it begs the question, how can this be? How can we get so much information decoded from such a small part of the brain? So we, actually Ranulfo mentioned that early on we looked at how space was represented in the posterior parietal cortex, and we found that what it does is it mixes, we thought there'd be sort of a map of space that didn't care where you were looking. So there'd be receptive fields out in space. And we didn't find that. What we found was still retinal receptive fields that move with your eyes, but they were also modulated or contained eye position information as well. So they mixed together eye position and retinal position information. And we trained neural networks to do the same task. And we found that they did the same thing. They produced what we called gain fields. And you could take 10, 20 hidden units within the network and represent all of space. So it's a great way, if you mix the variables within single cells, you can then decode a vast amount of information that you've compressed into those few neurons. So this, that was way back when. Zipser and I had a theory paper on this. And it's resurrected itself as have neural networks. So neural networks now are very much the rage because they've better learning algorithms are being used and they're more useful. And they also, for all the kinds of functions they do, seem to have this mixed encoding. And Fusi and colleagues at Columbia have proposed a randomly mixed nonlinear selectivity is a really good way of encoding information. And just to show you why that is, if you imagine just 3 neurons firing, and they each fire for 3 different states, but by different amounts, you can see that you could pass a classifier, which is like a plane through that space, and classify all 3 different states. So, yikes. We'll be on again soon. Time for the commercial. Okay, I'll be careful of that cable. So we decided to look at that empirically. So here we had two different effectors, the hand and the shoulder. So Nancy could actually shrug her shoulder and could imagine squeezing her hand. And we could do left or right side and imagine or attempt as two different cognitive strategies. So there are 8 different combinations. And in the task, she was indicated one of these things on each trial. So here, imagine right hand. So she imagines squeezing her right hand. And so what we found was we could decode all of those particular actions, and this just indicates what we instructed her to do and what we decoded, and this confusion matrix, the warm colors indicate high percentage success. So we could decode all of these things. If we looked, though, at the individual neurons, so here you have for left and right, and the go signal to go. And the green indicates here attempted hand movement. So this cell was selectively activated for just attempted left hand. And so that's when she really tried to squeeze. Here's a cell that's active for just imagined left or right hand movement. And here's one for imagined or attempted right hand. So you can see that all this information is mixed together within the population. But it's not mixed randomly, and this was a bit of a surprise. So if we look at the correlation for the strategy, side, and body part, we find that for the strategy, so that's attempt versus imagine, that it's highly correlated. And what that means is that if a cell is active for an imagined movement, it's also more likely to be active for an attempted movement. And we found the same for left and right side of the body. So attempting a squeeze of the right, that cell is more likely also to be activated by an attempted squeeze of the left hand. But if you separate by body part, then there's no correlation. So what we think this means is that rather than things being randomly mixed, that within the space of neural activity, that there are subspaces. So there are 2 spaces separated by the effector, and along within those subspaces, strategy and side reside in that kind of plane. And so you imagine then, this is just for 3 neurons, but if you took hundreds, you'd have a very high dimensional space and a high dimensional hyperplane through that space. So advantages of this, we think it's computationally efficient because if you learn something with one hand, you can perhaps more easily learn it with the other hand. This has been shown actually. And imagery, we know, is important for performance. So you hear about athletes who imagine or imagine a sequence of movements as part of their training for actually performing. Now, reasons for separating the activity would be that the hand is very different from the shoulder. So you may want to separate the computations that occur between those 2 areas. So if we go back then to how we think the cortex is organized, we have the sort of highly specialized view, and the equipotentiality view is really that everything comes in and is randomly mixed. And what we're finding is something in between, so it's a partially mixed selectivity, it's not random, but also it's widely interconnected, so it doesn't have high specificity within individual regions. So what we want to do now is to record from other parts of the brain and see if a similar structure exists. We're getting ready. We recruited a subject for motor cortex. We're wondering if motor cortex is also high dimensional, and people have just always thought of it as a low dimensional area. So we'll be finding out whether it is just involved with torques and muscle contractions and rotations around joints, or maybe it too contains many high-level functions within the realm of what motor cortex does. We'll also be looking at prefrontal cortex for executive control, in particular speech areas. This will help people that are mute with various diseases, and again see if speech might fall into this kind of representation. So it may be that as we look at these different areas, the different cortical areas, the hallmark of an area will be what is segregated. So that's one possibility. Of course, the other possibility is that it's really the variables that are correlated that make a cortical area very specific. So we'll find out. And it may also be some combination of these. Okay, so finally, I'll talk a bit about writing in signals. And the reason this is important is once we've decoded the intent of the subject, this is usually done under visual control, so you're getting visual feedback. But to actually manipulate an object, then you need fine somatosensory input. And if you anesthetize the fingertips, you really can't manipulate an object. And you probably notice when you go to the dentist and get a Novocaine injection, you can't really talk after that. So it's very important to have this somatosensory feedback. So what we plan to do is to sensorize a robotic hand and then send signals back by stimulating through, again, these microelectrodes, but now in the somatosensory cortex, the part of the brain for somatosensation. And we were motivated and inspired by the work of Ranulfo Romo, who showed in monkeys that for low-frequency vibration, this so-called flutter sensation, that he could either deliver mechanically the flutter sensation to a finger or stimulate somatosensory cortex with a series of pulses. And the animal did a very highly controlled discrimination psychophysical task where he differentiated between one frequency and another, saying one is higher or lower. And he found that with the mechanical stimulation and the electrical stimulation that he got the same psychometric curves. So this suggests that, well, very strong evidence, the monkey is actually feeling the flutter sensation. So based on this, we thought we could try, again, he's using microstimulation, so it's through an electrode buried within the cortex, so it just activates a few neurons. When the stimulus is up on the surface of the cortex, they use very large stimulation. That's been done often, and then you just get a kind of tingling or electrical sensation. So first, we tried it with non-human primates. This just shows a monkey who's controlling this limb to, it's actually in virtual reality, so he's seeing it in 3D. And then, since it is in virtual reality, we can occlude an area. We call this the handbag task because it's a lot like reaching into a handbag to feel around to find something. And so there's a little arrow there that shows where the monkey gets stimulation, but he doesn't see that. That's just for you. And his task is, if he feels the stimulation, to pause. And if he pauses there, then he gets a drop of juice. So with that animal study showing that we can do this kind of brain-machine interface, we've implanted a subject with microelectrodes, 2 in the somatosensory cortex, which is right here. The 2 arrays are to catch a big part of the somatotopic organization there. In this case, we implanted also for recording an area, another grasp area in inferior parietal cortex, posterior parietal, and also an area in ventral premotor. This is also the area F5 that Giacomo was talking about, we think. So we then inject in these arrays current. And what you'll see here is we have 2 arrays, as I mentioned. So you'll see one of the arrays will light up. That's the one that's being stimulated. The task of the subject is to begin with an intertrial interval that's indicated by this gray dot. Then this pinkish dot appears during the stimulation, which lasts for 1 second. Then there's a delay, and then this gray dot appears, and the subject says where the stimulus was felt. We asked them to describe in 1 word what the sensation is and the intensity. So the stimulus is there.
Yeah. W13, short, move forward, about a 1.
It's over there.
Yeah. X7 and X8. Medium graph, about a 7.
So that electrode.
Yeah. E13 is a short tap, about a 2.
So with that, one really novel new finding was that he described natural sensations. So this was a first for humans. And also, what was interesting, this is kind of a word cloud showing how often he described different sensations. Not only get cutaneous sensations, but also proprioceptive sensations. So, for instance, like the limb moving forward or moving to the right. And these are the different fields in the front and back of the arm where we produced sensations, each sensation being limited to a small region, as you saw earlier. So to conclude, the posterior parietal cortex is a very rich area for getting prosthetic signals. Intention signals can be shared with the machine for hyper control. Large numbers of variables are encoded in the posterior parietal cortex. We think this partially mixed representation. We found actually that not only the limbs, but also speech and imagined movement of the legs are represented there. So this kind of representation can actually code most of the body. And stimulation feedback of somatosensory signals can provide for an interface that's bidirectional. So this effort is, it's great because it involves really a team effort. We work with doctors, neurosurgeons, engineers, neurophysiologists, occupational rehab doctors. Also, you get to know the family and the patients very well. You're with them for years. They're like members of the laboratory. Also, it involves collaborations with not just our group at Caltech, of course, our 4 subjects so far who have made all this possible, but also medical schools, USC, UCLA, We collaborate with various universities and also with various rehab hospitals. So thank you.
Muchas gracias, Richard. Thanks a lot. If you like, if you have any question, please make it in English. And if you have to make a question, do in Spanish, and I will try to translate it. But Hugo, please.
I have a translator.
Okay.
Well, should I make it in English? Parietal cortex is really involved also in timing behavior, from perceptual timing to the execution of behavior in time. And most of the neuroprosthetics has been, focusing on space. So I'm wondering if you have done some experiments where, the device is calculating not only where it's going, but when.
So we have looked at timing. Actually, we looked at timing in the context of when subjects are aware of their intention. And there's a curious finding which we also reproduce, but we think have a different interpretation, that you're actually aware of something after you've actually planned it. And so in the course of those studies, we also, with the typing, but then extending it to asking the subjects to imagine doing different types of movements, we can see that we can predict ahead of time what they're going to do. And so also, as they start planning one thing, or as they're doing one thing, the next plan is already being formed. And so I think that's great because it means, of course, we can decode things much more quickly, and also that it shows sequential timing within this particular area.
Gracias, doctor. ¿En español? Un poquito. Ya nos dimos cuenta de lo fascinante que es la arquitectura y los circuitos cerebrales en todas las especies vivas, en el humano, que es lo que más nos interesa también. Estamos hablando de los mapas y de las neuronas. Quisiera saber si ha habido investigación, porque todo eso está formado por moléculas, por átomos, que son los que hacen las conexiones, son las moléculas inteligentes, que en este caso están situadas únicamente en el cerebro. Le agradeceré algún comentario sobre eso.
Sure. You can, one of the things people do, like in the connectome, they've looked at tracks, and as well, they look at different kinds of stains. So you can define areas also by the distribution of molecules within the different regions. So you have a great deal of heterogeneity when you look at the static brain with its connections and with and also even with functions and with lesions to the brain. Nature's kind of experiment usually wipes out several areas, but again, you can get very specific deficits. You saw in Giacomo's that you could stimulate areas and produce things like laughing or disgust. And so it was kind of hard, because I've always been kind of for functional specialization, and I believe that it's there, but it's more complicated. And so once you have this new window where you can record from a population of neurons, I think these areas are all different, but then they're connected to a bigger circuit. So when you tap into one part of the circuit, you see the activity of many different areas. So we've been surprised by that twice. First by the neural network simulations for space, and now by the neural prosthetic experiments.
There is a question.
I'm curious in the case of Eric and Nancy, how important the assistants, the people who are working with them are in terms of positive feedback and conversation in your experimentation.
You mean whether the actual, this helps with
the human dynamic part, yeah, in terms.
So you mean that learning to control with this neural prosthetic might return some rehab for them? Is that what you mean?
With Eric, he seemed to be mimicking the person who was with him. I mean, they were doing it together. There's a kind of dynamic that goes on. Yeah,
that was just because Tyson, they're kind of buddies, and so they were just both having a beer, so to speak, together.
But I wonder how important that is, that whole human part.
Yeah, that would be a good mirror experiment. That is true. Another thing we've thought about is most spinal cord lesions are partial. Our patients have complete damage, but it's conceivable that this kind of brain implant, through practice, could improve the pathways that remain. And so we don't know if by strengthening what you have up here, it might enable rehab in the parts below.
One more.
Yes. I would like to hear a philosophical approach on this matter, because this was an expected question, I guess. Because since reality is really I think a metaphysical plane. I forgot the question. Sorry, I'm nervous.
No problem.
I would like to hear a philosophical approach on that.
To this?
To the whole conference.
Oh, yeah. So I guess that's pretty broad, so I could say almost anything. But from so there's a lot of discussion about enhancing normal people. And so that's sort of philosophical, ethical, or adding intelligence to people through these techniques. But I don't worry about that too much or think about it too much, because this is really a medical application. So we're just restoring. We're not really enhancing subjects, but that is an area of great debate. And if there was a less invasive method of getting this fine detail of brain activity, then there would be a big deal. Yeah.
Gracias, Richard. Thank you very, very much. And before giving the microphone to Pablo Rudomin, that will take forever, I would like to make a very short comment, un breve comentario. Los dos conferencias que tuvimos esta noche muestran el poder de la experimentación. Los primeros experimentos fueron realizados en primates. En el caso de Giacomo Rizzolatti, animales comportándose prácticamente lo que saben hacer. Los monos hacen un movimiento natural, le gustan los cacahuates, la fruta, etcétera, etcétera. Y eso le permitió a él encontrar inicialmente las neuronas espejo.
O sea, un mecanismo muy poderoso generado por la evolución y que está insertado probablemente en los perros, en los gatos, en los monos, como se vio, y por supuesto, eso lo llevó a hacer los experimentos en humanos con técnicas no invasivas, como es el fMRI y el registro electroencefalográfico, donde puede ver el tiempo. No solamente le permitió a él mostrar que existían estas neuronas espejo, haciendo estos movimientos, observando los movimientos de los otros, sino también le permitió meterse a las partes más profundas de nuestro cerebro, que son las emociones, la empatía, el disgusto, el placer, etc. Entonces es un bonito ejemplo del poder de los experimentos que se hacen con ciertas especies hasta llegar al hombre. Y la verdad que es un producto extremadamente delicioso. En el caso de Richard Andersen, pues él empezó con los monos estudiando, identificó las áreas que tienen que ver con los movimientos voluntarios, planeados, etcétera, tanto de la mano como del ojo, hasta llegar a hacer los registros en los pacientes cuadriplégicos que tienen un potencial enorme, porque entonces quiere decir que se puede leer en la actividad de las neuronas e inyectárselo a las máquinas para que hagan cosas que nosotros que hagan por nosotros, no al revés, que algún día las máquinas nos digan lo que tenemos que hacer. Eso sí podría generar una reflexión filosófica. Y con esto, pues, yo quisiera dejar el micrófono a Pablo, porque tiene algunas cosas que decir antes de dar por terminado el simposio. Y yo con esto me despido. Muchas gracias por su atención. Pablo, por favor. Y por supuesto, la presencia de Giacomo, Richard y de Lenny, nuestros invitados.
Bueno, pues en primer lugar me da mucho gusto verlos a todos ustedes aquí y realmente ha sido un placer escuchar al profesor Rizzolatti, al profesor Andersen, y yo quiero que nos demos cuenta de algo extraordinario que hemos estado siendo testigos en estos momentos, en estos años. Y es una cosa tan sencilla. Nuestros pensamientos, nuestros actos son producto de la actividad de nuestro sistema nervioso, de nuestras neuronas. Hasta este momento, con todo lo que ellos nos han enseñado y han mostrado con técnicas muy espectaculares, no hemos tenido que invocar otras estructuras, otros conceptos. En ese sentido, yo siento que este es un camino que cada vez está más y más legitimizado, que a través del estudio de la actividad neuronal podemos entendernos a nosotros mismos, podemos entender cómo interaccionamos con otros, podemos entender cómo imaginamos, cómo soñamos. Quitando toda esta, digamos, es para mí sensacional cuando nos damos cuenta que pensamos en un movimiento, nuestras neuronas están planeando ese movimiento. Eso desde un punto de vista práctico, precisamente es lo que hemos visto en humanos parapléjicos o tetraplégicos. Podemos transportar esos conceptos, esas ideas a las máquinas, podemos tener empatía con otras personas. Entonces lo que yo quisiera es que pensemos en todas las implicaciones, no solo prácticas, sino filosóficas y sociales que tiene esto. Nosotros imitamos, estamos viendo en una sociedad en la cual precisamente las relaciones entre unos y otros son fundamentales para determinar toda una serie de acciones. Estos son momentos en la historia humana, junto con el descubrimiento de la estructura del DNA, ¿verdad? Que tenemos, que compartimos código genético con muchas especies, que de hecho todos provenimos de la misma rama, de las mismas moléculas, y que lo maravilloso es, como decía el profesor Edelman, cómo las moléculas llegan a imaginar. La imaginación, y estamos aquí viendo precisamente esta situación que nos lleva en estos momentos a estar unidos unos con los otros. Aquí no se habló un poco, en otras pláticas se habló ayer del altruismo, de la capacidad de generar acciones conjuntas que nos lleven a una sociedad mejor. No podemos olvidar esto, sobre todo en estos momentos que estamos viviendo en este país, en que usemos nuestro intelecto, nuestra imaginación para seguir peleando, si ustedes quieren usar la palabra, o luchando por tener una sociedad más justa, una sociedad en la cual todos podamos compartir el conocimiento y con la cual haya mayor justicia social. Con esto yo quiero darles las gracias a nombre del Colegio Nacional, porque ustedes saben muy bien que una de las funciones del colegio, y ahí está, libertad por el saber. Y libertad, ¿qué quiere decir? La posibilidad de elegir libre y conscientemente entre las diversas opciones que se nos dan. Somos afortunados todos los que estamos aquí de haber escuchado esto, y quiero darles muchas gracias, la bienvenida, y con esto por cerrar, hasta la próxima. Obviamente este es el inicio, la continuación de toda una serie de acciones que estamos teniendo en el colegio, en la cual queremos, Ranulfo y yo, y obviamente otros investigadores en otras áreas, ir profundizando en todas estas cuestiones de estudios del sistema nervioso. Muchas gracias y pues hasta la próxima.